A good Shabbos! Ooh, let me turn that off. How's everybody doing? We're so excited. Shabbos is almost here. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we learn some beautiful stuff from Tractate Megillah on a Friday afternoon, one of the earliest Shabboses of the year? Paula in Chicago, Yehudit in Florence, South Carolina, James in Indianapolis, Bill in mid-Missouri, Christo in Lubbock, Bella in Florida, Leona saying hello, friends, Nancy in North Carolina, and Leona's in Southern Illinois. Nobody's there on YouTube. See, we fixed all our technical difficulties, but it's Friday, people are at work, they're leaving town for the holidays. So it's an intimate gathering. Thank God you're here, my friends. Today's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by Ellie Westreich for this. It's so beautiful. That Hedva Chana Basara Frida, his wife, should have a smooth and easy pregnancy. Amen. May Hedva Chana have not just a smooth and easy pregnancy, but an enjoyable pregnancy, if that's possible. And may the baby come at the right time. And Ellie, may you and all of your loved ones be showered in blessings. And we say amen. Thank you for sponsoring today's episode and enabling us to share more Torah with more people. Folks, we're in our annual campaign. I'm saying it every day this month, but we're more than halfway through the month. We're only at 59% of our goal. We need everyone to climb on board so that we can fund our operations for the coming year and build the AT app. Donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. All right, where are we holding? This is Tractate Megillah, the 11th volume of the Talmud. We're in chapter 1. Today we'll be discussing the second Mishna of chapter 1 on Daf Hey, page 5. We actually pick it up at the right at the top of 5a on the A side. Excuse me. And Nina is not going to be here today. Our son is going on a Shabbaton, and she had to take him and drop him off to the drop-off point, which is a bit of a drive. So after I finish the page, I'll be scanning the comments section. So you got questions or comments, get them in, but make it short because when I'm, live and scanning, it's hard to, really focus and figure out which questions are going to be good for answering. Okay, let's see. So Rav said, just finishing the discussion of the first Mishnah, Rav said, one may read the Megillah in its proper time, right? These are the laws of Purim, and we've been talking on the first Mishnah of when we read the Megillah. In ancient times, they would advance the time of reading the Megillah for the smaller villages to the market days, a Monday or a Thursday, when the people were coming in from the fields and it was more convenient for everybody. But in the larger towns, they didn't do that. They would read on the 14th of Adar, which is the date of Purim. And in the walled cities, meaning cities that had walls around them, even at the time that Joshua led the children of Israel into the promised land, there they would celebrate Purim on the 15th of Adar. Currently, the only city we do that in is Jerusalem, because that's the only city we're sure that it had walls at the time that Joshua led the people into Israel. And we'll see why today, actually. So Rav said, one may read the Megillah in its proper time, meaning on the 14th of Adar, even privately, by yourself in your house. However, when it is read not at its proper time, for example, when the villages advance their reading to the day of assembly, to the market day, it must be read with a quorum of 10, with a minyan. Because the enactment allowing the Megillah to be read before its proper time was only made for the benefit of a community. And Rav Asi disagreed and said, both at its proper time and not at its proper time, the Megillah should be read with a minyan, with a quorum of 10. And the Gemara relates that there was an incident when Rav had to read the Megillah on Purim, and he was concerned for this opinion of Rav Asi, and he gathered 10 men, even though he was reading the Megillah in its proper time on the 14th of Adar. So even though he held that it wasn't necessary in that situation to have a minyan, he was concerned about this other opinion and respectfully gathered a minyan together so that he would be sure to be doing it correctly, even according to that opinion. All right, we're going to skip the last two paragraphs and go to the second Mishna of Tractate Megillah, chapter 1. Mishnah number 2. What is considered a large city where the Megillah is read on the 14th of Adar, as opposed to a walled city, right? So a large city here as opposed to the villages which can advance the reading earlier in time to the market days. But a large city, you can't do that. So what is considered a large city where the Megillah is read only on the 14th of Adar? Any city in which there are 10 idlers. Idlers, right? This is the importance of idlers. Who are these idlers? We'll be discussing that. However, if there are fewer than that, it is considered a village, even if it has many inhabitants. So what is considered a large city? It's a city that does not have 10 regular idlers in the synagogue. A city that does not have 10 regular idlers in the synagogue has the legal status of a village. And during the period when the reading of the Megillah for villagers was advanced to the day of assembly, we don't do that anymore, but they did it then, it was advanced in these places as well. Right? So even though they had a large population, if they didn't have 10 guys whose job it was to just sit around in the shul, I mean, they're obviously not sitting around doing nothing, they're learning, but they're able to learn in the synagogue all day long. They don't have a profession that they have to go to. They're like trust fund kids who can learn all day in the synagogue. That gives that city the status of a bigger city because it's got people engaged in learning all day rather than having to go to work. Fewer than that is considered a village. Continuing the Mishnah, it was with regard to these times for reading the Megillah that the sages said that one advances the reading of the Megillah before the 14th of Adar, and one does not postpone the reading to after its proper time. You might bring it up earlier, right, that you read it on the 13th or the 12th or even the 11th of Adar, no earlier than that, so that you could do it on a market day in the villages, but nowhere can you make the reading later than its date. In the walled cities, it could be on the 15th. Everywhere else, the 14th is the latest that the Megillah can be read. However, with regard to the time when families of priests donate wood for the fire on the altar, when the Holy Temple is standing in Jerusalem, which were times that those families would treat as festivals, as a private festival for the families that were bringing the wood, as well as the fast of the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, the saddest day on the Hebrew calendar, and with respect to the festival peace offering that was brought on the festivals. This was different than the festival offering, the festival peace offerings, which has enabled the pilgrims who would go up to Jerusalem during Passover or Shavuos or Sukkot to have, additional meat as that was part of a holy offering during their celebration, right? So at Pesach, you would have the Pesach, which is the Paschal lamb, but that wasn't necessarily enough meat for everybody. And then you would also have the peace offerings. A little bit of that goes on the altar. The rest is eaten by its owners. So with respect to these festival peace offerings and the fast of the 9th of Av and the celebration of the families that bring the wood, and with respect to the commandment of assembly, the hakel, of the entire Jewish people in the temple courtyard on Sukkot in the year following the sabbatical year to hear the king read the book of Deuteronomy. With respect to all these cases, one postpones their observance until after Shabbos and does not advance their observance to before Shabbos. So even though if Purim lands on Shabbos, we're going to advance the reading of the Megillah to the day before. So we would do it on Friday. If the 14th of Adar is Shabbos, we would read the Megillah on Friday, the 13th of Adar. But with respect to these other practices, bringing festival peace offerings, the fast of the 9th of Av, the celebration of the families that bring the wood to the temple, the assembly in certain years when the whole nation would gather in Jerusalem to hear the king read the book of Deuteronomy, all of these things, if they landed on Shabbos, you wouldn't bring it to Friday. Rather, you would postpone it to Sunday. So the question is, why is it that if the Purim lands on Saturday, that we're going to read the Megillah on Friday, but with these other practices, if they land on Shabbos, we don't do it on Friday. Rather, we postpone till Sunday. What is different about the Megillah reading versus these other practices and the way we handle it with respect to Shabbos? And the Mishnah continues, even though the sages said that one advances the time for reading the Megillah and one does not postpone the reading, one is permitted to eulogize and fast on these days, right? So on Purim, which is a day of great joy, a day of rejoicing, we don't eulogize. So if somebody is being buried on that day, we'll do the burial, but we'll save the eulogy until after Purim so that we shouldn't, be brought to tears on Purim. But if you advance the Megillah reading, if Purim falls on Shabbos, and then you're going to advance the Megillah reading to Friday, so on that Friday, even though that's the day of the Megillah reading, you may eulogize and you may have a fast if you have some kind of a personal fast, even though that is the day of the Megillah reading. You're not allowed to fast on Purim, but you are allowed to fast on the day of the Megillah reading if it's advanced because Purim lands on Shabbos. Nevertheless, even though we permit eulogizing and we permit fasting on the day of a Megillah reading, which was advanced because Purim landed on Shabbos, nevertheless, the other practices of Purim, like gifts for the poor, right? We give gifts to the poor. Now, you can't do that on Shabbos, so you are going to do that on the day of the Megillah reading. And Rabbi Yehuda said, when is the Megillah read on the day of assembly before the 14th of Adar? In a place where the villagers generally enter town on Monday and Thursday. However, in a place where they do not generally enter town on Monday and Thursday, even though it's a small village that doesn't have 10 idlers sitting in the synagogue, so it would qualify to have the Megillah reading advanced to a Monday or Thursday in terms of the town's size. If, in fact, the people who live in the outlying villages don't enter town on Mondays and Thursdays, then we're not going to advance the Megillah reading to the Monday or Thursday, since the purpose of advancing the Megillah reading to Monday or Thursday was just that people would be gathered around for that Megillah reading. But if the people don't gather on Mondays and Thursdays, then we're not going to advance the Megillah reading to that day. That's the Mishnah. The Gemara. We learned in the Mishnah that a large city is one that has 10 idlers. And it was taught in a Baraisa, the 10 idlers that are mentioned here are 10 idlers that are in the synagogue, i.e. men who do not have professional responsibilities other than to sit in the synagogue and attend to communal religious needs. And the presence of 10 such men establishes a location as a prominent city. So it's interesting. So it's not that they're sitting in synagogue learning. They should be if they're sitting there anyway and they're not engaged in other stuff. But really what it is they're available to be a minyan at any time, right? When is it so important to have a minyan? When you have a mourner, right? So after the days of Shiva, when he sits in his house mourning, after that, God forbid somebody's parent dies, okay, so then, the male child of somebody whose parents died has a responsibility to say Kaddish, at every prayer service for 11 months. And you can't, and that's the prayer for the dead, and you can't say Kaddish without a minyan. You need that quorum of 10 men for that. So these guys who are just always in the synagogue, maybe they're even being paid for that, or at least they have the freedom to do that, but they make it possible for somebody to say Kaddish at any time. And we learned in the Mishnah, it was with regard to these times for the reading of the Megillah. And by the way, this is, with respect to these large cities and small cities and having idlers or not, I'm not aware of any synagogue, that pays 10 guys to just sit around. There are kollels, there are yeshivas where people are learning all the time, so you could count on there being 10 men always present. But I'm not aware of in modern times where you've got, 10 idlers sitting around waiting to do something like this. Nor do we advance the Megillah reading before the 14th, unless the 14th lands on Shabbos. We don't do that anymore, right? The Megillah is always right on the 14th. We don't advance it to Monday or Thursday. That was done in ancient times when the Sanhedrin was determining the beginnings of months and the word went out from Jerusalem that a new month was announced. Okay. So we learned in the Mishnah, it was with regard to these times for reading the Megillah that the sages said that one advances the reading of the Megillah and one does not postpone it. All right. So the Gemara asks, what is the reason for this? Why is it that we advance the Megillah reading, but we never postpone it? And the Gemara asks, what is the reason for this? And Rabbi Abba said that Shmuel said, the verse states that in Esther 9:27, the Jews ordained and took upon them and upon their seed, right, their descendants, and upon all who joined themselves to them, and it shall not pass that they should keep these 2 days, right? That's the end of the book of Esther. They say because of the miracles, how we were saved in this story when Haman sought to destroy all the Jews in the world, that we set up these days as an eternal celebration, the celebration of Purim. And because that verse includes the words, and it shall not pass, which indicates that the designated time must not pass without the reading of the Megillah. That's why we can make the Megillah reading earlier, but not later than its appointed time. Having mentioned a teaching of Rabbi Abba in the name of Shmuel, the Gemara cites another one of his statements, right? This is a typical kind of Talmudic linchpin for going on a digression. We learned the teaching of a sage. Let's hear another teaching of this sage, even if it has nothing to do with the subject at hand. And Rabbi Abba said that Shmuel said, from where is it derived that one does not count days to make up years? What does this mean? A year is considered to be comprised of either 12 or 13 lunar months. It's the Hebrew calendar. But it is not comprised of 365 days. Why? As it is stated, Exodus 12:2, which is the first commandment given to the nation, of the months of the year. This shall be the first to you of the months of the year, which indicates that you count months to make up years, but you do not count days to make up years. A year is not composed of a certain number of days. It's composed of a certain number of months. 12 months in a regular year, 13 months in a leap year. That's how the Hebrew calendar works. And the Gemara adds, and the sages of Caesarea said in the name of Rabbi Abba, from where is it derived that one does not calculate hours to reckon the months? How do we know how long a month is? A lunar cycle takes approximately 29 and a half days. But a calendar month is considered to be either 29 days or 30 days. We don't call a month 29 and a half days. And therefore it is not precisely a lunar cycle. How do we know that we do that? As it is stated, Numbers 11:20, until a month of days, which indicates that you calculate days to reckon the months, but you do not calculate hours to reckon the months. New subject. We learned in our Mishnah, however, with regard to the time when the families of priests donate wood for the fire on the altar and the fast of Tisha B'Av and the festival peace offering and the commandment of assembly, one postpone, if they land on Shabbos, one postpones their observance until after Shabbos, usually Sunday, and does not advance their observance to before Shabbos, Friday. And the Gemara explains the reason for this law with respect to each of these items. With regard to Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av is not advanced because one does not advance calamity. Since the 9th of Av is a tragic time when we commemorate the destruction of both temples that both happened on Tisha B'Av and other calamities in Jewish history, its observance is postponed as long as possible. We don't want to make it earlier. It's such a tragic thing. We'll make it later. We don't want to deal with it. The festival peace offering and the commandment of assembly, the hachal, are not advanced because the time of their obligation has not yet arrived, and it is impossible to fulfill mitzvahs before the designated time has arrived. It was taught in a baraisa. Now, with respect to the commandment of assembly, just a little bit more information on that. The mitzvah of hakhel is detailed in the Torah at Deuteronomy 31:10 through 13. This practice took place on the day after the first festival day of Sukkot. And some say it took place at the conclusion of the last day of Sukkot. And they would build a stage of wood in the courtyard, and the king would stand upon it, and he would read from the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy, to the entire nation, men, women, and children. And Rashi explains that the reason this is not done on Shabbos is that this ceremony requires that the children be brought as well. And there is a concern that the prohibition against carrying and taking out items on Shabbos will be violated. A different explanation is cited in the Jerusalem Talmud, the Yerushalmi, which maintains that the reason that the hakhel did not take place on Shabbos is due to the horn blasts that accompanied the ceremony. Alternatively, it is because they needed to build the stage on that very same day. At any rate, when they did that, they didn't do it on Shabbos. And they wouldn't do it before Shabbos, they would do it after Shabbos. All right, where was I? And it was taught in a baraisa. One postpones the festival peace offering, the chagiga, and the entire time period of the festival peace offering. And the Gemara attempts to clarify this statement. Granted that when the baraisa says that the chagiga, the festival peace offering, is postponed, it means that if a festival occurs on Shabbos, when the festival peace offering cannot be sacrificed, okay, so one postpones it until after Shabbos and sacrifices the offering during the intermediate days of the festival, whether it's Pesach or Sukkot. However, what is the meaning of the phrase, the time period of the festival peace offering? That they postpone that, what does that mean? And Rav Oshaya said, this is what the baraisa is saying. One postpones the festival peace offering if the festival occurs on Shabbos, and one postpones the burnt offering of appearance even due to the festival itself. Despite the fact that a festival day is the time for sacrificing a festival peace offering, the burnt offering of appearance may not be sacrificed until after the festival day. Meaning this burnt offering that's an ola, right? So that's an offering that is consumed entirely on the altar when the temple is standing. And so you might, go to Jerusalem and you want to, you're very thankful for all the blessings in your life. And you want to give it up for the Lord, right? So you're going to bring this burnt offering. And even non-Jews were able to bring that kind of offering when the temple was standing. Now, what's the difference between a festival peace offering and a burnt offering of appearance? Both have to do with you making that pilgrimage to be in Jerusalem and visit the temple. But the festival peace offering, most of it is eaten. And we know that you can cook on a festival. You can't cook on Shabbos, but you can cook on a festival. One of the main differences with respect to labor between festivals and Shabbos. But a burnt offering goes up entirely on the altar. It is not eaten by a person, and therefore you can't bring that up on the festival itself. You have to wait till the festival is over, just like you can't bring it up on Shabbos. And the Gemara adds, whose opinion is reflected in the Mishna according to Rav Oshaya's explanation? It is the opinion of Beis Shammai, as we learned in the Mishnah at Beitza 19a, that Beis Shammai said, one may bring peace offerings on a festival day to be sacrificed in the temple, because most portions of a peace offering are eaten by the priests and the individual who brought the offering. Consequently, its slaughter is considered food preparation, which is permitted on a festival day. And one may not place his hands on the head of the offering, which is called simicha, as that includes leaning on the animal. And on festivals and Shabbos, we don't make use of our animals. And leaning on an animal is like making use of an animal. You can't ride the animal. You can't use it to carry stuff for you. And you can't even lean on it that way. And since smicha requires leaning, which is part of bringing an offering, So according to Beis Shammai, you can't do that on the festival. However, burnt offerings may not be brought at all on the festival. Since they are not eaten, their slaughter is not considered food preparation. Beis Hillel disagree, and they say one may bring both peace offerings and burnt offerings on a festival day, and one may even place his hands on them, and that actually is the halacha. That's the law. We skip a couple paragraphs. We're near the bottom of 5a. Rabbi Elazar said that Rabbi Hanina said Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi did several unusual things. He planted a sapling on Purim. Now we know you can neither plant nor harvest on Shabbos nor on a festival. Now, is Purim a festival like Shavuos or Sukkot or Pesach, like Passover, with respect to that you can't do any kind of work, just like you can't do it on Shabbos, you can't do it on the festivals, other than with the exception of cooking? What about planting? Is that something you can do on Purim, or does Purim have the same decree that you can't do work on Purim like you can't on festivals? Well, here's Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi planting a sapling on Purim, and he was not concerned about performing labor and thereby possibly denigrating the day of Purim. Also, Rebbe bathed at the time when the wagons, Corona, were traveling through Tzipori, i.e. on the market day, a Monday or a Thursday, when the public would know about it. They would know that he was bathing, which was on, and it was the 17th of Tammuz, which is a fast day, one of that cycle of fast days that commemorates when the walls of Jerusalem were breached on the way to the first temple being destroyed. Or the second temple, I'm not sure right now, or maybe both. And so, i.e. on the market day, when the public would know about it on the 17th of Tammuz. So he was bathing on a fast day. And he did that to show that bathing is permitted on that day. It's not like Tisha B'Av when bathing is prohibited. And Rebbe sought to abolish the fast of Tisha B'Av. And with respect to Tisha B'Av, the sages did not agree with him. But it seems they did agree with him about planting the sapling and bathing on the 17th of Tammuz. But when he sought to abolish the fast of Tisha B'Av, then the sages disagreed with him. And Rabbi Abba, we're on the B side of page 5, Rabbi Abba Bar Zavta said to Rabbi Elazar, "My teacher, the incident did not occur in this fashion. Rebbe never sought to abolish the fast of Tisha B'Av. Rather, it was a year when Tisha B'Av occurred on Shabbos. And they postponed it until after Shabbos." That's what we've been talking about, right? The fast of Tisha B'Av, if it lands on Shabbos, so you observe it on Sunday. And Rebbe said about that case, well, since it has already been deferred from its appointed time, let it be altogether deferred this year. He didn't seek to abolish the fast of Tisha B'Av forever, but he said, since we didn't do it on Tisha B'Av, let's not do it this year. And the rabbis did not agree with him. And Rabbi Elazar read the verse about Rabbi Abba Bar Zavta, 2 are better than 1, from Ecclesiastes 4:9, meaning it is good that you were here to provide an accurate report about that incident. Between my memory and yours, we got it right. I would have gotten it wrong. Excuse me. The Gemara asks, and how could Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, how could Rebbe plant a sapling on Purim? Didn't Rav Yosef teach with regard to the verse, Esther 9:19, therefore the Jews of the villages who dwell in the unwalled towns make the 14th day of the month of Adar a day of gladness and feasting, and a good day, Yom Tov, which is what we call a festival, a good day, and that the term gladness teaches that it is prohibited to eulogize on Purim. Feasting teaches that it is prohibited to fast. And the term good day, Yom Tov, teaches that it is prohibited to perform labor, just as on a festival, which is also called a Yom Tov. Rather, what happened was as follows. Rebbe was in a place that observed Purim on the 14th, and when he planted the sapling, he planted it on the 15th. So the question is, did he have to refrain from planting on the 15th because in other parts of the country, in the ancient walled cities, they were celebrating Purim. Should he refrain from planting a sapling on the 15th, even though he was not in a city which was observing Purim that day? And the Gemara asks, is that so? Wasn't Rebbe in Tiberias? And Tiberia was surrounded by a wall since the days of Joshua, son of Nun. Consequently, he was obligated to observe Purim on the 15th also. How could he plant a sapling on the 15th in a town where they were observing Purim on the 15th? Rather, you should say just the opposite. Rebbe lived in a place that observed Purim on the 15th, and when he planted the sapling, he planted it on the 14th. The Gemara asks, wasn't it obvious to Rebbe that the city of Tiberia was surrounded by a wall since the days of Yehoshua ben Nun, since the days of Joshua? Didn't Hezekiah, King Hezekiah, read the Megillah in Tiberia both on the 14th and on the 15th of Adar because he was uncertain if it had been surrounded by a wall since the days of Joshua ben Nun or not? He wasn't sure. Was it a walled city at the time that Joshua entered Israel or not? And the Gemara answers, Hezekiah was indeed uncertain about the matter, whereas it was obvious to Rebbe that Tiberia had been surrounded by a wall in the time of Joshua. The Gemara asks further, and when it was obvious to Rebbe that the Megillah should be read in Tiberia on the 15th, was it permitted to plant there on the 14th? Isn't it written in Megillah's Tainus that the 14th day and the 15th day of Adar are the days of Purim, and one is not permitted to eulogize on either of those days? And Rava said, this statement is necessary only to prohibit those who observe Purim on this day to eulogize on that day, and those who observe Purim on that day to eulogize on this day. Since the 2 days are mentioned in the Bible, it was only necessary to mention them in Megillah's Tainus. Remember, we talked about Megillah's Tainus. That was actually the first part of the Mishna that was written down, and it was just a list of dates of days when you're not permitted to fast or eulogize, because it was a list of dates that were commemorating happy events that had been turned into sort of partial holidays by the sages. And Purim and Hanukkah were part of that list. Now, since the 2 days are mentioned in the Bible, it was only necessary to mention them in Megillah's Tainus in order to indicate that the prohibition against eulogizing applies to both days. So presumably the same should apply to the prohibition against performing labor. Consequently, how could Rebbe plant a sapling on the 14th of Adar, even if he was reading the Megillah in that location on the 15th of Adar? He shouldn't have been planting a sapling on the 14th if, generally speaking, the 14th and the 15th are days of rejoicing and Yom Tov, and that we shouldn't be doing labor. That's what the Gemara is asking. And the Gemara answers, that applies only to eulogies and fasting. No eulogies or fasting on both days. However, labor is prohibited for only one day, either the 14th or the 15th, depending on where you are, and no more. And the Gemara asks, is that so? Didn't Rav see a certain man planting flax on Purim and cursed him? And the man's flax never grew. And the Gemara answers, well, there the man was obligated to observe Purim on that day in that location, and he planted flax on the day when he was supposed to be observing Purim in that locality. Therefore, it was certainly prohibited for him to perform labor. Now, Rabbah, the son of Rava, said a different answer to this question. Even if you say that Rebbe planted the sapling on his own day of Purim, i.e. on the day that the Megillah was read in his location, it was still permitted to plant the sapling. And this is because the Jewish people accepted upon themselves the prohibitions against eulogizing and fasting on Purim, but they did not accept upon themselves the prohibition against performing labor. Now, what is the law with respect to performing labor on Purim? Even in places where it is customary on Purim to refrain from performing the labors that are prohibited on Shabbos, This prohibition applies only on the day of the Megillah reading, and it is not prohibited to perform labor on the day that other cities are reading the Megillah for them. However, some say that one should be strict in this regard, and it appears that the law in these cases is dependent on the custom of the place. That's from the Mishnah Berurah. And in most places, it is not the custom to be strict in this regard. And this can be proven from the fact that initially, when Mordecai and Esther proposed the celebration of Purim, it is written, Esther 9:19, a day of gladness and feasting and Yom Tov, a good day. And at the end, when the celebration of Purim was accepted by the Jewish people, they announced throughout the empire of Persia that these would be days of feasting and rejoicing, etc. And they sent out the message from the capital in Shushan. Now, did the Jews throughout the empire of Persia accept that decree from Mordecai and Esther? And Yom Tov, which, I'm sorry, where? Okay. That was Esther 9:19. And at the end, right, 3 verses later in the book of Esther, when the celebration of Purim was accepted by the Jewish people, it is written that they should make them days of feasting and gladness. Whereas the term Yom Tov, good day, which alludes to a day when it is prohibited to perform labor, is not included in that verse, right? In 9:22, it doesn't include the words Yom Tov. So the people, the Jewish community around the world, never accepted upon themselves the prohibition against performing labor on Purim as if it were a Yom Tov, and therefore the prohibition never took effect. It might be a minhag in certain communities not to work on Purim, but is not, a negative commandment. And the Gemara asks, if labor is permitted on Purim, so then what is the reason that Rav cursed the man who planted the flax? And the Gemara answers, it was a case of matters that are permitted by law, by halacha, but others were accustomed to treat them as a prohibition, the custom of that locality, the minhag, in which case one may not permit these actions in their presence, lest they come to treat other prohibitions lightly. And in the place where that man planted his flax, it was customary to abstain from labor on Purim. However, in Rebbe's place, it was not the custom to abstain from labor on Purim, and therefore it was permitted for him to plant the sapling even in public. I'm almost done. If you got questions or comments, get them in. The Gemara examines the matter itself cited in the previous discussion. Hezekiah read the Megillah in Tiberia both on the 14th and the 15th of Adar because he was uncertain if it had been surrounded by a wall since the days of Joshua the son of Nun or not. And the Gemara asks, was he really uncertain about the matter of Tiberia? Isn't it written, Joshua 19:35, and the fortified cities were Zidim, Zer, and Hamat, and Rakat, and Chineret. And we've maintained that Rakat is Tiberia. Right? Tiberia is that's a Roman name, right? That was a city that was later renamed during the Roman period. And the Gemara answers, this is the reason that he was uncertain. Although Tiberia, or in English Tiberius, although Tiberia was surrounded by a wall at the time of Joshua, Hezekiah was uncertain about the law due to the fact that on one side there was a wall of the sea. Tiberia is on the Mediterranean Sea, i.e. there was no physical wall surrounding the city on all sides, since it was protected by the sea on one side. And the Gemara asks, well, if so, why was he uncertain? The sea is certainly not a wall. It may protect the city, but it's not a wall, as it is taught in a Baraisa with regard to the sale of houses in walled cities, another area of law where whether a city had a wall or not in ancient times has an effect. Leviticus 25:30, which has a wall, indicates that the city has a bona fide wall and not merely a wall of roofs. If a city is completely encircled by attached houses, but there is no separate wall, it is not considered a walled city. And the next verse, which is referring to cities that have no wall round about them, Leviticus 25:31, excludes Tiberia from being considered a walled city, as the sea is its wall on one side, and it is not fully encircled by a physical wall. Consequently, Tiberia is not considered a walled city, and the reading of the Megillah should be done on the 14th of Adar there, and not on the 15th, and we should see that clearly. And the Gemara answers, with regard to the sale of houses of walled cities, Hezekiah was not uncertain. Where he was uncertain was with regard to the reading of the Megillah. What are the unwalled towns and what are the walled cities that are written with regard to the reading of the Megillah? Is the difference between them due to the fact that these unwalled towns are exposed, whereas those walled cities are not exposed? If so, since Tiberia is also exposed, as it is not entirely surrounded by a wall, so it should be considered unwalled, and they read the Megillah on the 14th. Or perhaps the difference is due to the fact that these walled cities are protected, whereas those unwalled towns are not protected, and Tiberia is protected by the sea, and it should be treated as a walled city. And it was due to that reason that Hezekiah was uncertain when to read the Megillah. That's what we've got today. Let me scan comments and questions, because I'm assuming that Nina's not back yet, so she won't be passing the questions to me. Okay. Tom Beck says, I count seconds with regard to this idea that we count years by months, not days, and we count months by days and not by hours. And Tom says, I count seconds. One day is 86,400 seconds. Everything else is a multiple of that. Every second is precious, right, Tom? Let's see. Let me go up to the top and scan down. Okay. Oh, Gordo's with us from Scotland. Great to have you from across the pond. Paula was late, but here. Great to have you all here. Tom says, I think Tisha B'Av will be on Shabbos next year, so that fast will be on Sunday. Exactly. Just so. And Allie says, yay, live. I just listened to AT Daily 312 through 321 today while driving for work. Love, love, love. Wow, you are dedicated. That's fantastic, Allie. You keep going at that pace and you will be caught up. I think today's episode is number 706. Leona, so the more people you have willing to spend their lives studying and learning raises your town's prominence and place in society. Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. Absolutely. Okay. And Bill is giving me a big number of minutes. Is that how many minutes there are in a year? 525,600 minutes? All right. Okay, well, that's what we've got today. All right, my friends, it's great to have been learning with you on a Friday afternoon. May we all be blessed to have a sweet, refreshing, rejuvenating Shabbos. We could all use it. If you're in that cold north of the country, the Northeast, I think, is getting really cold these days. May you be warm and dry. May the country and all countries get the rain that they need during these winter months. And I'm wishing you all good Shabbos.